Hello, my name's Tom, and we are back talking about F1 Fantasy, and we're going to Canada this weekend. This Final Thoughts video is a little bit different because normally I do this after FP1 and FP2, but for various reasons I'm doing it before FP2 happens, and in FP1 we didn't really learn anything unless you're interested about Canadian wildlife. So yeah, FP1 was just a complete write-off. So FP2, hour and a half of running in FP2, so it'd be very interesting to see what happens there. But I've got my thoughts about what I want to do for my team anyway. So I'm going to go through that, and yeah, we'll obviously check out FP2 and FP3 results and see if it kind of coincides with what I am thinking at the moment, and then obviously we'll base our team off that. And to be honest, we're in a little bit of a holding pattern still until F1 make any changes, which I don't suppose they will anytime soon. We're just kind of a little bit stuck with our teams. It makes a lot of sense to me to just sort of stick with the triple Red Bull, the triple Aston Martin. And then budget driver is very tight in my opinion between Yuki Tsunoda and Guan Yu Zhou. Yeah, in terms of budget, I guess let's just go over and done with because the budget seems to be like the main topic of conversation most weeks. I do think Yuki Tsunoda and Guan Yu Zhou are the best options. This is the results from last year in Canada. I was just looking at earlier. If we have a look at down here, we can see overtakes. In terms of overtakes, Guan Yu Zhou is top of the leaderboard. Tsunoda's in third place. They have 36 overtakes, and positions gained or lost. They're both at a healthy 13 and 17 respectively. So I do think that they are the best options. And Guan Yu Zhou, I almost feel like he should probably have never left my team in the first place, and I am kind of tempted to put him back in this weekend. A couple of reasons: A, because he's so far the highest scoring budget driver, and I don't see any reason why that shouldn't continue. B, he did pretty well around here last year. I think he finished in P8. Whereas Tsunoda actually had a DNF, so that makes me kind of lean towards him. There was also something mentioned. I don't know the exact wording, but they were talking on the what do you call it, the weekend warm up, the video that they do on the F1 YouTube, and they were talking about Tsunoda not having confidence on the brakes, and particularly if it's wet conditions, which there is a chance of it being wet this weekend, although maybe more so in qualifying than the race. But the Tsunoda maybe wasn't as confident in braking, and yeah, I think that could be a kind of a bit of a factor going into this weekend, and that maybe Guan Yu Zhou is just a safer pick, you know. And he's still really lowly owned, for considering what a fantastic budget option he is at 16%. He's a great option, you know. Tsunoda's at 12%, so they're both good differentials, and you could argue that maybe you could even afford to go like double option with literally Tsunoda and Guan Yu Zhou. Then you've got like three or so million to upgrade elsewhere. The only trouble is, where else are you going to really upgrade? Like potentially, if the Alpines look good, then you could switch out Aston Martin and afford the Alpines. And you know, if you trust both these budget drivers to deliver, which I wouldn't say it's not impossible. And I think the build like this looks good. However, Alpine obviously did have a couple of issues. It looks like Ocon was having, I don't know exactly the exact issue that was going on, but Ocon was stuck in the garage a little bit at the beginning of FP1 before it was complete write off. And obviously Gasly having a problem with his gears and his steering wheel, something along those lines. So yeah, a couple of little niggly issues for the Alpine. So maybe, I don't know, we'll see what happens in FP2, FP3 if they look particularly strong. However, a lot of the talk so far this weekend, in the build up to this weekend, is Aston Martin at the Stroll family's home race. Lots of talk about from Lawrence Stroll saying he kind of wants a double podium. That might be a little bit ambitious, particularly as I think the Red Bulls are still going to be the team to beat. But yeah, it's definitely, they've bought some upgrades, so I do think that the Aston Martins are going to be strong. Although, you know, listening to Alonso and Stroll actually talk about the upgrades, doesn't it seem like a bigger upgrade as perhaps the media are kind of making it out to be? But nevertheless, it is still an upgrade, and it should, you know, hopefully close that gap between Aston Martin and Red Bull. So I do think that probably they're still, you know, as I said at the beginning of the video, I still think that the triple up on them is a fine option, and I'm probably going to go with a team like this. However, you know, there's talk of Mercedes as well. Well, we obviously saw in Spain, Mercedes were very strong, and there's been a lot of talk after the race of, oh, well, it's because the Barcelona track just suits the Mercedes. And yeah, they do seem to run well there in general, year on, year out. You know, it's a nice smooth track, some high-speed corners that might suit the car. But Canada is a very different track. And you know, listening to interviews with Lewis and George was like kind of saying, oh, I don't think the track's going to suit us so well. But then Lewis was saying, we just don't know. Like, and fundamentally, the W14 is kind of like a new car over the last couple of weeks. It's changed so dramatically that the truth is maybe the Lewis is right. We actually just don't know what to expect from the Mercedes around here, and if they're particularly strong in FP2 and FP3, as long as it's not like, you know, a complete whitewash with thunderstorms and rain and everything. Hopefully we get some good data. Famous last words. But yeah, you know, if Mercedes do look particularly strong, then I am very tempted. You know, I would love to bring in Lewis Hamilton, but he's just too expensive. The only way I can get Lewis Hamilton is dropping back Verstappen, and that is not happening. But George Russell is certainly an option. But yeah, despite Lewis Hamilton having a great record around Canada, I'd love to have him in my team. I think the only real way of getting George Russell in our team is dropping Perez, and I don't think it's crazy to do something like this and go with a team like this. Perez has been really off form the last couple of races. He's made a couple of mistakes in qualifying, just didn't have the pace in Spain. He made the mistake in Monaco. And yes, he sort of worked his way up a little bit, particularly in Spain, and got some reasonable points. But he also DNF'd here in Canada last year, didn't instill me a confidence. So, yeah, you know, if the Red Bulls don't look absolutely stonking red hot, then I'll be very tempted just to try something a little bit different. What's the worst that can happen? You know, Mercedes and George Russell are reliable drivers. They've proven over the last, since Russell has been with Mercedes over the last year or so, he's proven to be a reliable, consistent driver. The Mercedes, we know, is a very reliable car. Very rarely has any reliability issues that cause it to DNF, although we did have that issue in Australia that caused him to DNF. But anyway, let's brush it under the carpet and just dream for a minute that we might be able to change our teams and break away a little bit from the triple stack of Red Bull and triple Aston Martin. And I am kind of tempted to go with this purely dependent on what happens in FP2, FP3. I'd like to know what you guys think. Are you at all tempted by George Russell? Because he's 20% owned at the moment, and Sergio Perez is 47, so nearly half the people in the entire game. Say there's about 2 million people playing this game. About 1 million people pretty much have Sergio Perez on their teams, whereas only 20% own George Russell. So it's quite a nice little differential. Obviously, it's going to backfire if Perez gets back on form and finishes on the podium, whatever, and George Russell's sat back in like P5 or whatever. Then you're going to look a little bit silly. But that is the risk that we need to take, I think, this season. We need to look for the opportunities because they're going to be few and far between with the pricing structure as it is. So, yeah, I do think before FP2 presents itself, before FP3 happens, I'm kind of tempted with George Russell for the reasons just stated. Consistency, Mercedes potentially strong this weekend. We'll see what happens in practice sessions. And Perez a little bit off form. Is this the moment we seize in order to change our teams up a little bit? If not, if Mercedes don't look quite so stonking hot, then maybe we'll stick with Sergio Perez. And going back to Sergio Perez, the team just looks so boring when I go back to the triple blue over there. Let's add some colour to it. But yeah, I do think another thing to think about as well is that in general, Mercedes don't do particularly well on the Friday, and they sort of get better as the weekend goes on. They have a decent, they're never particularly strong in qualifying over the last year, but then it comes race day and they're really good. Obviously, with the weather being the way it is, that could throw some spanners in the works. But yeah, I do think that just keep a close eye on the Mercedes. If they look like they're sort of building into the weekend and looking stronger and stronger, I do think George Russell is the potential for getting in the team and just changing things up and hoping for the best. Come on. Apart from that, though, that's pretty much what I'm going to go for. I think it's going to be kind of this team, or it's going to be the one with Perez in it. And like I say, budget driver wise, I think Guan Yu Zhou just about edges Tsunoda for me, even though I think in general they're pretty much 50-50. I think Guan Yu Zhou seems pretty reliable and just is an overtake king. In terms of the Lance Stroll slot, which is another one which is a bit debatable whether you want to go him or Pierre Gasly, or there's not much else you can go in that. You could look at like someone go down to like Magnussen, who's also particularly good at the overtakes. If we go back to overtakes, he's second on the list for overtakes. In terms of positions gained, only 2 on average across the season, so not great for positions gained. But if you want to take a little bit of a punt on Kevin Magnussen, reasonable shout. But for me, I almost likely be sticking with Lance Stroll over Gasly. A couple of reasons. It's home race for Lance Stroll. I expect him, to be kind of instilled with confidence with the upgrades and his home crowd, and with his dad breathing down his neck, he has to perform. So yeah, I do think that Stroll is definitely a good option. Gasly is a fine alternative, I believe, and I think they're pretty much exactly almost identical ownership. Yeah, 32% Gasly and only 30% Stroll. So very similar in terms of ownership. Not that I want to read too much into ownership, especially when it's this sort of more budget option slot or whatever. But yeah, I do think that Stroll and Gasly pretty tight between them. For me, I think, like I say, for those reasons, I think Stroll kind of edges over Gasly for me. I know a lot of people talk about Gasly kind of over Stroll in terms of the DNF factor. And yeah, if Stroll DNFs, it's going to hurt having Aston Martin and Lance Stroll. But, you know, by having Gasly, you're just kind of putting more eggs in your basket for which can break. And yes, obviously, if Gasly DNFs, then you're only getting -20 instead of the -40 for Stroll. But then you're still going to be getting the -20 for Aston Martin in your constructor. So it's kind of, you know, 6 of one, half and dozen of the other as to what it looks like in terms of DNF. Depends which way you look at it. But for me, yeah, this is probably going to be the team I'm going with. You know, the only real exception is Sergio Perez, George Russell, bit of a shuffle up. Last thing I'm going to talk about is chips. For me personally, I am not going to use any chips, at least at this moment. If you've got the no negative chip, it's worth consideration if there's going to be a lot of thunderstorms or whatever it is, pouring rain on Sunday, although I think the chance of rain is a little bit low. In terms of DNF history of this track, it's not being that high, considering it's kind of like this kind of almost like hybrid street circuit. So yeah, in terms of DNF, not a great fear factor for me. So unless it's going to absolutely bucket down with rain, I probably would hold off on the no negative. In terms of other chips, DRS boost, absolute no. I'm still holding out. Looking potentially at Austria for the DRS or like the unlimited chip or something along those lines. But yeah, in terms of other chips, autopilot is another potential option. Again, if it's going to pour with rain, you know, particularly if it's likely, if there's a possibility of Fernando Alonso competing for the win, even though I still find it unlikely despite the upgrades, then maybe autopilot will, you know, give you that benefit if Alonso does trump Verstappen this weekend. But other than that, I'm not really looking at any other chips, and I've already used my Final Fix chip, so I won't be using that. But again, Final Fix, if you haven't used it yet, is definitely an option. Again, particularly if there's rain affected qualifying, could see people qualify vastly out of position. You might want to make that switch going into qualifying, so bear that in mind as well. But in general, I'm not looking to use any chips this weekend. So that's kind of my thoughts for now. Like I say, FP2, keep an eye out for those results, and also FP3. And yeah, kind of Umin and Aren, Russell versus Perez. It's kind of the only real decision for me this weekend. But yeah, anyway, enjoy it, because Canada for me, the track is absolutely one of my favourites. Like when I race it in the actual, like on the F1 game on the old PlayStation, I find it probably in my top like 2 or 3 tracks. I absolutely love it. It's got such a great flow to it, and it's very entertaining to watch as well. I'm sure it will throw up a good race, particularly if there's a little bit of rain in the air. But yeah, I do love Canada. I'm looking forward to this weekend and just seeing some good racing and hoping for the best, crossing my fingers for the fantasy team to provide. So yeah, good luck everyone this weekend. Let me know what you think in the comments as always. And yeah, thanks for tuning in to my thoughts. So catch you soon. Bye for now.